And here's where it gets even messier. The double standard. Plenty of athletes have skipped. Sometimes the loudest move is silence. And Shedeur Sanders just proved it. While the media expected him to step up to the mic, he shut them out completely. And that silence echoed louder than anything he could have said. Dan Orlovsky was the first to crack. Instead of calmly analyzing the situation, he exploded on live television, ranting that Shedeur owed the media his words. But this wasn't just a take, it was a meltdown. You could hear the emotion, the frustration, and the loss of control in every sentence. Why such a strong reaction? Because the media needs players to feed them storylines. Without quotes, without sound bites, their shows fall flat. By cutting them off, Shedeur revealed how dependent they are on him. The outrage wasn't about him dodging interviews. It was about the media's grip slipping. Press conferences before without being dragged through the mud like this. The intensity aimed at Shedeur feels different, like it's tied not just to him, but to his father, Deion Sanders. Suddenly, the criticism doesn't look like accountability. It looks like a target. That target ties directly into what some are calling the good old boys narrative. The old guard of sports analysts, the ones threatened by Deion's new school energy, seem to be lashing out. And Shedeur, as his son, has become their easiest punching bag. But Orlovsky wasn't alone. Other analysts piled on, parroting the same "he owes us" line. It felt less like individual opinions and more like a coordinated outrage campaign. Then came the fans, and that's where the script flipped. Instead of siding with the media, they stood behind Shedeur. On social media, his silence became power. By saying nothing, he said everything. So now the question is flipped. Who really needs who? Does Shedeur need the media to validate him, or is it the media that desperately needs him to survive? Because at the end of the day, maybe it's not Shedeur Sanders who owes anyone answers. Maybe it's the media who needs to explain themselves. Dan Orlovsky's reaction to Shedeur Sanders refusing to speak to the media wasn't just criticism. It was a full-on meltdown. On ESPN, what should have been a simple discussion about a player's media availability quickly turned into something far more personal. Orlovsky's voice carried a level of frustration that felt less like sports analysis and more like someone who had just been personally offended. He said Shedeur owed the media his words, that it was his responsibility to talk, as if silence was some kind of betrayal. But let's be clear, players skipping the media isn't new. Over the years, we've seen countless athletes dodge press conferences, give short answers, or even walk out entirely. Yet the outrage has never reached this level. So why did Orlovsky react with such raw emotion here? That's the real question. The answer might be simpler than people think. Shedeur's silence wasn't just silence, it was power. The sports media thrives on player soundbites. Those quotes and clips fuel debate shows, podcasts, and online content. Without them, entire segments fall apart. Orlovsky's outburst revealed just how fragile that system really is. He wasn't just mad at Shedeur for skipping questions. He was mad because it exposed how dependent the media has become on him. And what makes it even more obvious is the double standard. Plenty of athletes have refused to engage before, but none were hit with this kind of anger. The difference here is that Shedeur isn't just any athlete. He's Deion Sanders' son, a player carrying both the spotlight and the criticism that comes with the Sanders name. Whether Orlovsky admits it or not, that weight is part of why his rant hit so hard. In the end, Orlovsky's meltdown said more about the media than it did about Shedeur. It showed the insecurity of a system that can't stand being shut out. And it proved that sometimes saying nothing can be louder than saying everything. When Shedeur Sanders chose silence over speaking to reporters, it did more than frustrate the media. It exposed their biggest weakness. Sports media thrives on sound bites. Every quote, every short answer, every slip of the tongue becomes content. It fills hours of debate shows, drives headlines online, and keeps the cycle spinning. Without those words, the machine starts to break down. That's why Shedeur's decision hit so hard. It wasn't just about skipping questions after a game. It was about pulling the plug on the very thing analysts depend on: access. For decades, players have been trained to feed the media something, even if it's just the usual cliches like "we played ... hard" or "we'll bounce back." But Shedeur didn't play along. His silence wasn't passive, it was a challenge. Think about it. When an athlete refuses to engage, the media loses control of the narrative. They can speculate, they can complain, but they can't shape the story in the same way. And that's where the anger comes from. Dan Orlovsky and others weren't just upset about missing a press conference. They were upset because Shedeur showed that they don't hold all the power anymore. It also highlights a bigger shift in sports culture. Athletes today don't need the media like they once did. With social platforms, they can speak directly to millions of fans whenever they choose. That means the old gatekeepers, the talk shows, the panels, the columnists, aren't as essential. Shedeur's silence reminded everyone of that reality. He doesn't have to say a word for his presence to dominate headlines. And maybe that's what stings the most. The media can't control silence. They can't twist it, can't spin it, can't edit it into a hot take. It leaves them powerless, which is exactly why Shedeur's decision became bigger than the game itself. Sometimes, saying nothing doesn't just frustrate people. It exposes the truth. The media needs the athlete far more than the athlete needs the media. One of the biggest reasons Shedeur Sanders' silence turned into such a storm is the clear double standard at play. Over the years, plenty of athletes have skipped press conferences or given reporters nothing to work with. From Marshawn Lynch's famous "I'm just here so I won't get fined," to superstars like Kawhi Leonard or Bill Belichick giving dry, one-word answers, the media has seen it all. And while those moments caused a stir, they never triggered the kind of outrage we're seeing now. So why is Shedeur being dragged? Is simple. It's not just about Shedeur. It's about the name on his jersey and the legacy behind it. Being Deion Sanders' son puts a target on his back that most athletes will never have to carry. Every move he makes, every word he says is magnified. And when he chose silence, the response wasn't just about him. It was about the resentment some people still feel toward his father. That's where the double standard becomes obvious. When other players stay quiet, it's brushed off as part of their personality. When Shedeur does it, suddenly it's a character flaw, a sign of arrogance or immaturity. The media isn't just holding him to the same standard, they're holding him to a higher one, and not in a fair way. It almost feels personal, as if some analysts are waiting for any chance to criticize the Sanders family. Shedeur just gave them an opening, and they pounced. But in doing so, they revealed more about themselves than about him. The anger didn't feel like accountability, it felt like bias. And that bias is exactly why fans are starting to push back. They see the double standard. They see that the criticism is harsher, the tone is sharper, and the expectations are different. And the more the media leans into it, the more obvious it becomes. At the end of the day, Shedeur isn't being judged for staying silent. He's being judged for who he is. And that says more about the system than it does about him. The reaction to Shedeur Sanders' silence didn't just expose frustration in the media. It tapped into something deeper, something fans are calling the good old boys narrative. For years, the sports world has been shaped by a certain group of analysts, commentators, and insiders who all seem to share the same mindset. They're part of the old guard, the gatekeepers who believe they decide which stories get told and how athletes should act. But here's the problem. Deion Sanders came into college football and blew that system up. He didn't play by their rules. He didn't need their approval to build hype, draw attention, or dominate the headlines. And now, his son Shedeur is carrying that same energy, unapologetic, confident, and unwilling to bow down to tradition. That alone makes him a target. When analysts like Dan Orlovsky erupt over Shedeur's silence, it's not just about missing a post-game interview. It's about the clash between two worlds: the old-school good old boys club that wants control and a new generation that refuses to hand it over. The outrage sounds less like analysis and more like resentment, and it's not just speculation. Listen closely to the language some commentators use. Words like arrogant, selfish, or entitled keep popping up when they talk about Shedeur. But are they really describing his actions? Or projecting their frustration that he and his father are rewriting the playbook without needing their validation? That's why so many fans are calling this narrative out. They see through it. They see that Shedeur isn't being criticized fairly, but rather punished for not fitting into the mold the old guard created. To them, his silence wasn't disrespect, it was defiance. It was a reminder that the new wave of athletes doesn't need to beg for airtime or approval. And that's exactly why the good old boys are rattled. Shedeur's silence didn't just shut them out. It exposed how little power they really have when athletes stop playing along. When Dan Orlovsky's rant about Shedeur Sanders hit the airwaves, it didn't stand alone. Almost immediately, other analysts jumped in, echoing the same complaints and repeating the same narrative. Shedeur owed the media his words. One by one, sports shows picked up the story, amplifying the outrage until it felt less like individual takes and more like a coordinated attack. That's when fans started noticing the pattern. The words might have been slightly different, but the message was identical. Shedeur's silence was a problem. Shedeur needed to explain himself. Shedeur was in the wrong. But when every voice on TV sounds the same, it doesn't feel like independent journalism anymore. It feels like a pile-on, and the more the talking heads repeated it, the more desperate it looked. Because here's the truth. The media thrives on unity when they want to push a storyline. If one analyst criticizes a player, that's an opinion. But when multiple networks, panels, and headlines all attack together, it starts to look like an agenda. Shedeur wasn't just being critiqued, he was being targeted. The irony is that the louder the media screamed, the more powerful Shedeur's silence became. Every time they demanded answers, his refusal to give one made the story grow. His lack of words forced them to talk more, speculate more, and stretch the narrative further just to fill airtime. They ended up proving his point without him saying a thing. Fans on social media called it out instantly. They asked why the same energy wasn't used for other athletes who dodged press obligations. They asked why this story was dominating cycles when bigger issues in sports were being ignored. And the more fans questioned it, the more obvious the media's bias appeared. In the end, the pile-on didn't weaken Shedeur's position. It exposed the media's. Their echo chamber revealed how badly they rely on controlling the story. And when they can't, their outrage becomes the story instead. When the media thought they had cornered Shedeur Sanders with their outrage, something unexpected happened. The fans flipped the entire narrative. Instead of joining the criticism, social media platforms lit up with support for Shedeur. Hashtags, clips, and memes started flooding timelines. And suddenly, silence wasn't seen as disrespect. It was seen as a power move. Fans understood what the media didn't want to admit. Shedeur didn't owe anyone an explanation. In their eyes, he had already proven himself on the field. Why should he be forced into giving sound bites just to feed debate shows? That perspective spread fast, with thousands of comments praising him for holding his ground and refusing to play by the old media's rules. What made this moment even more powerful was the way fans reframed it. They began comparing Shedeur's silence to legendary athlete standoffs, moments when players decided to take control of their own narrative. Instead of calling him immature, fans labeled him calculated, saying he knew exactly what he was doing. His refusal to speak became a statement in itself. I don't need you to validate me. The louder the media got, the more the fans pushed back. For every critical segment on ESPN or FS1, there were countless replies online, calling out hypocrisy and pointing to the double dot standards. What started as a pile-on quickly turned into a backlash, not against Shedeur, but against the very voices trying to shame him. And that's where things shifted. Silence, which the media had framed as weakness, became a symbol of strength. Shedeur didn't just win support, he won leverage. Fans weren't tuning in to hear analysts complain anymore. They were tuning in to see what Shedeur would do next, even if that meant doing nothing at all. In the end, the fans made the media irrelevant in their own story. Shedeur's silence wasn't isolating him, it was amplifying him. And every cheer online made it clear. The people were on his side, not theirs. At this point, it's impossible not to notice the real reversal of power. The media, the so-called gatekeepers of football narratives, are losing control, and Shedeur Sanders is the reason why. Every analyst who tries to dissect him ends up making themselves look frantic, desperate, and sometimes ridiculous. Meanwhile, Shedeur doesn't just sit back. He quietly rewrites the rules. He doesn't chase approval, doesn't perform for the cameras, and certainly doesn't play by anyone else's script. And that's exactly what terrifies the old guard. They built a system where athletes needed them to succeed. The interviews, the quotes, the sound bites were the currency. But Shedeur doesn't need that currency. His performance on the field, his calm confidence, and his strategic silence make him untouchable. Every time the media tries to bait him, he simply lets them spiral. The louder they get, the calmer he remains. It's almost poetic. Analysts used to be the ones creating stars. Now, stars like Shedeur create themselves. He moves through the chaos like a conductor, orchestrating attention without ever saying a word. And every attempt to manipulate the narrative just reinforces his image. The more they critique, the more it becomes undeniable. Meanwhile, Dan Orlovsky and the other talking heads are left chasing validation from each other rather than the athlete himself. Every meltdown, every overanalyzed clip only strengthens Shedeur's mystique. They want him to react, to fit their idea of a quarterback, obedient, predictable, and easy to sell. Instead, he proves them wrong again and again. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't need to. The scoreboard, the highlights, the fan support, all of it does the talking for him. This isn't just a lesson in composure. It's a masterclass in influence. The quietest player in the room becomes the loudest presence without ever speaking. And in 2025, that's more than just strategy. It's power. Shedeur Sanders isn't just playing football. He's changing the game entirely, showing that control, confidence, and self-assurance will always outlast noise and chaos. In the end, what makes Shedeur Sanders so fascinating isn't just his skill on the field. It's the way he controls the narrative without ever opening his mouth. While the media scrambles for quotes, hot takes, and reactions, he quietly stacks wins, endorsements, and respect. Every analyst meltdown, every overanalyzed moment only strengthens his influence. The louder they get, the calmer he stays. And that contrast makes his presence feel almost untouchable. It's not arrogance or disrespect, it's strategy. Silence has become his loudest weapon, and the sports world can't quite handle it. They want him to perform for them off the field, to bend to their rules and narratives, but he refuses. He doesn't need validation, applause, or permission. His confidence, discipline, and composure do all the talking. And that's the twist. Being himself is exactly what makes him unstoppable. Shedeur isn't just a quarterback. He's a blueprint for the next generation of athletes. He's proving that influence isn't earned through statements or headlines. It's earned through action, consistency, and control. He's flipping the old media playbook on its head, showing that power comes from choosing when and how to engage, not from letting someone else define your story. And as the analysts panic and the networks scramble to find drama, The fans are watching, learning, and cheering for authenticity. Ultimately, Shedeur's story's about more than football. It's about confidence, self-reliance, and mastery over the noise that tries to distract you. It's a reminder that the loudest voice isn't always the one speaking. Sometimes, it's the one who refuses to be pulled into someone else's chaos. Shedeur Sanders has shown that control, calm, and purpose are the true currencies of influence. And in 2025, silence doesn't just speak, it wins.